Good afternoon. My name is Michael Reynolds, and I'm the director of the program in Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies. I would like to welcome you to today's event, a discussion with Ambassador Anatoly Antonov. I'd like to thank the co-sponsors of this event, the Program on Global Science and Security, and the Woodrow Wilson School. I would also like to thank Ambassador Antonov for taking the time to visit Princeton. I don't think I need to explain to this audience that American-Russian relations have entered a very difficult phase. As someone who remembers the Cold War and was spurred to study Russian by the Cold War, I remember all too well how the fear that the Cold War might turn hot and escalate into a nuclear war shaped lives in Russia, the United States, and around the world. Although the situation today is thankfully in many ways fundamentally very different from that of the Cold War, it is, I think, in some other ways, more dangerous. Today, the United States and Russia find themselves locked in diplomatic conflict in, among other areas, Ukraine and Syria. In and around those countries, the armed forces of the United States and Russia are operating and sometimes conducting combat missions in proximity. This is to say nothing of the ununiformed armed forces, proxies, and allied armed forces. I won't comment on Ukraine, but as someone whose expertise lies in the Middle East, I teach in the Department of Eurasian Studies here, let me just say that if you are confused by what's taking place in Syria, I can assure you that the actors in that region in Syria are just as confused themselves. In other words, the possibilities for mistakes, miscalculations, direct armed conflict, and escalation between Russia and the United States are, in my estimation, far from minimal. And whereas during the Cold War, Washington and Moscow had developed and maintained a way of communicating during crises and managing potential crises, today I'm less confident that a comparable capacity exists. It is, therefore, I think, essential that our governments speak to each other more often, not less. And in part for that reason, we invited Ambassador Anatoly Antonov to visit us. The ambassador is a native of the city of Omsk, Russia, and he holds degrees from the Moscow Institute of International Relations and a doctoral degree from the Russian Academy of Sciences, where he wrote his doctoral dissertation on the theme of arms control as a factor in national and international security. Ambassador Antonov has been in Russia's diplomatic service for 4 decades, and in that time he's occupied a wide range of posts, both in diplomatic missions abroad and in the central apparatus of Russia's foreign ministry. From 2011 to 2016, he also served as Deputy Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation. In August of 2017, he was appointed Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary Ambassador of the Russian Federation to the United States. Our two discussants this afternoon are Dr. Bruce Blair and Anna Makanju. Dr. Bruce Blair of Princeton's program on Science and Global Security served as an Air Force Minuteman Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Launch Control Officer before going on to work as a project director at the U.S. Congressional Office of Technology Assessment, and then as a senior fellow in the Foreign Policy Studies program at the Brookings Institution. He founded or co-founded the World Security Institute, the Center on Global Interests, and Global Zero. He received a MacArthur Fellowship Prize for his work on nuclear arms control. Most recently, he served as a member of the U.S. Secretary of State's International Security Advisory Board. Anna Makanju is a visiting lecturer in the Woodrow Wilson School. She was born and grew up in the city of Leningrad before coming to the United States. As I might say to the ambassador, "Bola vasha, stala nasha." That is, she was yours, she became ours. Mrs. Makanju holds a JD. Ms. Makanju holds a JD from Stanford Law School, and after practicing law, entered government, serving as director for Russia at the National Security Council and the Chief of Staff for European and NATO Policy in the Office of Secretary of Defense, and Senior Policy Advisor to the Permanent Representative of the United States Mission to the United Nations, and Special Policy Advisor for Europe and Eurasia to then Vice President Joseph Biden. Ambassador Antonov will open the discussion today by speaking for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then our two panelists will briefly respond to the ambassador's remarks. After the ambassador answers any questions that our panelists might ask, we will use any remaining time that we have for questions from the audience. So with that, please join me in thanking and welcoming our guest speaker, Ambassador Antonov.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me to be here. I'll try today to prove you that Russia is not an enemy to the United States. I just would like to prove you that we would like to have a very good, pragmatic relations with the United States and with you. Dear colleagues, Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs is one of the world-renowned centers for studying theory and practice of international political life. This is the place where new ideas are born and people are educated who will implement these ideas. I commend Princeton University's initiative to launch a multi-year series of workshops and lectures devoted to improving Russia-United States relations. I would like to emphasize that it is young people who will determine the spirit and substance of relations between our nations. Unfortunately, nowadays, there is a lot of fake news surrounding Russia and its foreign policy. To break this stereotypical thinking, to oppose it with an unbiased analysis and positive knowledge is a task where your direct involvement is very important. Let's try to discuss two issues: Russia-United States relations and the future of international arms control system. Why are these topics so relevant for the world's destiny, for ordinary Russians and Americans, for all of you sitting in this auditorium? The thing is that the United States and the Soviet Union, and now Russia, possess 95% of nuclear and missile arsenals of the entire world. Over several decades, the Soviet, Russia, United States treaties on the reduction of nuclear and missile arsenals were not only at the center of bilateral relations, but at the same time essentially defined the state of global security. Positive outcomes of the negotiations had a favorable impact on disarmament in other areas, as well as on the international situation in general. Russia-United States relations have deteriorated. This situation does not meet the interests of both countries, which are two permanent members of the UN Security Council. We bear a special responsibility for peace and security on the planet. This is why we have to be cautious, responsible, avoid confrontation, and coordinate, where possible, the steps on global arena. So far, it has not been possible to organize such a skillful work. Moreover, Russia is defined as an adversary in the United States strategic documents. It seems that political and economic sanctions, media attacks, attempts to isolate Russia are used by certain politicians to bring our country to its knees, force it to change the course of its foreign policy. I am confident that you will understand our desire to preserve and strengthen Russian sovereignty. We are not doing that at the expense of the security of other states, including the United States. Let us put aside the causes of the current crisis in Russian-United States relations. I will just say this. During the 90s, a very hard time for my country, we put too much trust in the outer world, counted on the help and readiness of other countries to build a common and indivisible security with no room for the weak and strong ones, where everyone would have equal rights and responsibilities. What eventually happened was well described by an American writer and journalist from San Francisco, Chris Kenton. I quote, "The globalists did trap the bear in 1991 when the USSR failed. However, rather than befriending the bear, they caged it and then starved, tortured, and humiliated it for the next 8 years. That's why, when the bear tore down the cage and fought back. I would like to point out that from historical standpoint, the fundamental interests of our countries have almost never clashed. Let's leave aside the time after the October Revolution, when it took years for the United States to recognize and accept a young Soviet republic. Even the Cold War was a conflict of ideologies rather than the basic national interests. I must emphasize, we have no territorial claims to each other. The Russian Empress Catherine the Great supported the United States in its struggle for independence. Emperor Alexander II and Abraham Lincoln called each other good friends. Our country supported the American president during the US Civil War. We fought side by side against Nazism. Millions of our citizens died to give us a chance to live in peace. Each year, on April 25th, together with our American friends, we commemorate the historic encounter between the Soviet and the United States troops on the Elbe River. The event is one of the most powerful symbols of our brotherhood in arms. These few, yet important examples show the significant benefits we can provide for the Russians, the Americans, and the entire world when we join forces against global threats. Today, the international community faces serious challenges in international security and strategic stability. The situation is aggravated by unresolved regional conflict, the rise of the power factor in global relations. The international law is being grossly violated. Attempts are being made to replace the notion of law with so-called rule-based order, the parameters of which will be determined by a select few. There are also attempts to undermine the role of the United States Security Council, to create a coalition of states, we called it like-minded states. We have seen dangerous, illegitimate decisions to revise internationally recognized documents, as it took place in The Hague regarding the Convention of the Prohibition and Elimination of Chemical Weapons. Experts talk about the beginning of a new arms race. Today, everyone again looks at Moscow and Washington. Leaders of a number of countries offer their aid in arranging a meeting of the two presidents. We hear warning from reasonable politicians against the collapse of disarmament and arms control system. Matters of particular concern are the prospects of non-proliferation of the weapons of mass destruction and means of their delivery. It's high time for President Putin and President Trump to discuss strategic stability and the future of nuclear arms control, primarily the INF and this New START. The history of nuclear and missile agreements reminds us of how hard those breakthrough deals were struck. Both sides showed political will and understanding that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. It seems that this principle deserves to be reaffirmed nowadays. United States withdrawal from the ABM Treaty in 2002 was a serious blow to strategic stability. The point is that the ballistic missile defense system, despite its defensive nature, can have a significant impact on the implementation of the deterrent concept. This concept is exactly the foundation of the global security system, Russian and American as well. The interrelation between strategic offensive and strategic defensive arms is clearly stated in the New START. The future of the US missile defense system development will directly affect the prospects of reaching next agreements. Today, we are patiently waiting for the United States to define its stance on the future of the New START. In Helsinki, Vladimir Putin proposed to extend the treaty for another 5 years, which can be done quickly enough. However, there is not too much time. The new START expires in 2021. The current US administration is not to outline its approaches on missile defense. Policy review in this area got delayed for some reasons. Perhaps it would be no exaggeration to say that today politicians and political scientists, legislators and arms control experts are worried about the United States' plan to withdraw from the INF Treaty, concluded in 1987. I would like to remind that due to this treaty, 2 classes of ground-launched medium-range and short-range ballistic cruise missiles were eliminated. It was the first international agreement in history on real nuclear disarmament. Now it is on the brink of collapse. Russia and the United States have mutual complaints over the implementation of the INF Treaty. We have always expressed our readiness to maintain a professional dialogue with the United States colleagues to address mutual concerns. We are confident that should there be political will, a compromise can be reached. We still stand for continuing consultation with a view to preserve INF Treaty as one of the cornerstones of international security. Today, one can hear opinions that nothing will happen if the United States abandons the INF Treaty. The argument is that over 15 years ago, Washington withdrew from the IBM Treaty and there were no catastrophic consequences. I don't think it would be accurate to paint such a rosy picture. The denunciation of treaty or conventions has never led to strengthening of international security, be it the IBM Treaty or JCPOA. The future of the INF Treaty or the New START concerns not only Russian and United States security. It affects the underlying problems of the international security. Preserving these treaties would be a proof that our countries adhere to their obligations on nuclear disarmament in accordance with NPT. More and more often, colleagues ask about the future of the NPT given the current erosion of the nuclear disarmament process. This treaty is a solid nuclear non-proliferation barrier. Apart from its non-proliferation task, the NPT is a unique instrument that promotes nuclear disarmament as well as international cooperation in peaceful use of nuclear energy. The situation with the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty is troubling. I wish to remind that Russia, Great Britain, and France, that possess nuclear arsenal, have already ratified the treaty. We expect a clear and simple United States position on the CTBT, a treaty the fate of which will directly influence future steps on nuclear disarmament. We still believe that the fulfillment of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action on Iranian nuclear program is relevant. The UN Security Council Resolution 2231 must be observed by everyone. In our opinion, the measures stipulated by the JCPOA, including verification and control, as well as mechanism of information exchange, are unprecedented and effective. They provide reliable guarantees that Iran uses its nuclear program for peaceful purposes only, which was repeatedly confirmed by the International Atomic Energy. There is much to be done in order to reach denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We welcome the establishment of the US-North Korea and inter-Korean dialogue. Such positive momentum goes along with roadmap which was worked out earlier by Russia and China, including a comprehensive and incremental approach to resolving this issue. Dear friends, there are many problems with strengthening arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament. The Russian side is ready for serious, substantial discussions on all these matters. But the conversation has to be candid, respectful, transparent, and professional, with no megaphone diplomacy. Creating a crisis is always easier than finding a solution to it. Mending Russia-United States relations will take long-term and persistent efforts. A lot of ground, and above all trust, will have to be rebuilt from scratch. But the complexity and scale of the task is no excuse for doing nothing. It is important to promote bilateral projects with less disagreements and more binding ties. A good example, our bilateral cooperation in outer space, where it is obviously much better than on Earth. One can only welcome the statements made by the United States National Security Advisor John Bolton at the conclusion of his October visit to Moscow on enhancing the coordination between our military representatives in Syria. By the way, restoration of a full-fledged dialogue between our defense ministries would facilitate preventing conflict situations and improve bilateral relations. It would have a positive impact on the global state of affairs. A few more examples of fruitful cooperation. In December 2017, Russian President Vladimir Putin thanked the CIA in the conversation with the United States President Donald Trump for providing intelligence information that helped to prevent a large-scale terrorist attack in St. Petersburg. On our part, the Russian side notified the United States intelligence services that the Tsarnaev brothers were planning a terrorist attack in Boston. Unfortunately, the outcome was different. We can also recall constructive cooperation during the Sochi Olympic in 2014 and the recent FIFA World Cup in Russia. I would like to remind that during the Soccer World Cup, our country was visited not only by leaders of many countries and governments, but also, most importantly, by hundreds of thousands of soccer fans from across the world. By the way, 46,000 United States fans, second place after China, who saw the real Russia, an open, friendly, and modern country. The majority of guests were genuinely happy and expressed hope to return. They obtained their personal experience of the hospitality of our people. This was a triumph of public diplomacy, which showed that all boogeyman stories about my country are fake. Russia-United States relations cannot stay on the decline forever. The world needs strengthening of strategic stability, which, for its part, depends on the quality of dialogue between Moscow and Washington. We need to step back from confrontation, look for compromises and ways to reconcile. The goal is to develop mutually beneficial relations that would meet the interests of both Russians and Americans. We are ready for such work. Thank you very much.
Now, Bruce Blair will ask us to make some comments and ask some questions.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And welcome, Ambassador. It's good to see you again. I knew you in your previous incarnation as Deputy Defense Minister. Thank you for coming. It's a privilege. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. It's a full house. It's wonderful. I have three brief questions and just a few brief remarks to provide some context for those questions. So I'll jump right into the first one. I would argue that the diffusion of power in the world today is of the utmost importance to the conduct of foreign policy. The diffusion of power among nations, between nations, such as, for example, the rise of China, diffusion of power to non-state players, including banks and NGOs, financial institutions, and corporations. Facebook today probably has more power than most of the countries of the world. Apple's market valuation of $1 trillion, I think we can appreciate, is a huge sum. It represents 2/3 of the annual GDP of Russia. And the key implication of this diffusion of power, it seems to me, is that the success of all of the players from all of the sectors, whether governments or corporations, depends on the ability to build coalitions across sectors, government, business, et cetera. And that in turn depends on a savvy capacity for cooperating and building trust. So where do we stand today on that dimension of coalition building, cooperation, and trust? I think in the case of Russia, to be very frank, the indications suggest that the country is moving in the opposite direction. And that's illustrated almost weekly by events such as the event of the Russian attack on the Ukrainian ships at the Kerch Straits. It's illustrated in myriad other ways, from Russian isolation in general in the world to an almost total lack of allies, to the inability to attract foreign investment, Western investment in particular, into Russia, to the general state of confrontation between Russia and the West. Now, there are, as the ambassador pointed out, some very important exceptions. In the area of counterterrorism, there is still strong cooperation. Russia still puts a lot of our things that we want into space, although they're yielding to SpaceX to perform that function. We have good cooperation on non-military Arctic issues, although the militarization of the Arctic, which Russia is spearheading, I think is complicating that process. So where do we go from here? The ambassador suggested, I think, or implied, that the arms control, particularly nuclear arms control or strategic stability arms control, could and should lead the way as a primary means of fostering cooperation and stability and all of the rest. And I agree with that. And the ambassador played a really important role in contributing to that process when he was the lead negotiator for the latest nuclear strategic arms control agreement, the New START agreement. So, and I greatly admire the ambassador for working with Rose Gottmuller to produce a treaty that was negotiated in record time. So my question, though, is, it's one thing to talk about cooperation and how, and all the rest, but what are the big, bold steps that Russia is prepared to take in order to advance a strategy of cooperation and coalition building? And maybe the biggest and boldest thing is that Russia will team with China in some very close partnership, and that could be a dramatic change in geopolitics in the world. But just on a more pedestrian level, is Russia prepared to do things like, big and bold things like, rise above the spirit of the INF Treaty and provide the United States access to the weapons that are alleged to be in violation of that treaty? That would be kind of the big, bold step that I think would signal a commitment to this effort of cooperation. Or would Russia be prepared to join the United States in pledging never to be the first to use nuclear weapons? There are a lot of questions about the role of nuclear weapons in Russian strategy. My second question, and I'll jump, I'll be much briefer, has to do with the demographic crisis. That may be overstating it a bit in Russia. The decline in the population, which is fairly dramatic in the sense that in the next In the next 20 years or so, Russia's population may shrink by 10, 15 million people. And in just a couple of years, Russia will begin to lose 1/4 to 500,000 people from its workforce. The implications here seem to me to be potentially very dramatic from across the board, from security, military strategy to the economy. So my question here is, how does Russia plan to cope with this? Does it imply that Russia will rely more on nuclear weapons for security, or since it may not any longer have the ability to field a large standing army, will it shift to asymmetrical warfare and things like cyber warfare strategy for its security? And my third question, and it's just one sentence, is this: what really? There's a lot of debate in the West about Russian nuclear operational strategy doctrine, with a lot of folks making the argument that Russia has a strategy of early first use of these horrible weapons in a crisis. What exactly is Russia's strategy for the use of nuclear weapons? I mean, in a very succinct sense, and what, in particular, what is Russia's position on the first use of nuclear weapons in a confrontation? Thank you. Thank you very much.
I just try to help you to understand me, what I'm planning to explain. Would like to draw your attention to what my colleague has mentioned in the beginning. If you permit me, I just only would like to repeat a few questions from the first part of his remarks. First, what Russia could do, what kind of steps we can take to meet some United States concerns. That Russia, whether Russia is ready to be open, transparent regarding our missiles capabilities, regarding INF and so on. Please, I tried to send you a message today that we are ready to cooperate with the United States. We would like to have a good relations with the United States. We respect United States interest everywhere, but we need reciprocity. We would like you, I mean the United States, to treat us on equal footing. We are not ready to speak in such a manner that Russia should do some steps, should take some steps, and the United States will see and wait, like professor in auditorium asking students, please give me your answer on my questions. That's all. You see that as to INF, for example, we have our concerns. I would like to say today openly that we are ready to tackle this issue. At this stage, we have no any solid proofs and evidence that Russia has violated INF. Could anybody put me on the table evidence? We are trying to persuade our American colleagues to explain us where and how we have violated INF treaty. At this stage, we haven't received solid information. But at the same time, please, I just would like to draw attention to what you have mentioned. You decided to avoid Russian concerns. We have very serious concerns regarding compliance of the United States to INF treaty. It's up to you to decide how you will treat the Russian Federation, whether we are equal partner or we, I don't want to offend anybody, or we are from Africa, small country, whom it's possible to punish for everything. And the United States is a superpower that can run the whole world. We have to decide together whether we have united values, interests. We have some differences. It's fine. Even in family, you see that there are some contradictions between man and wife. It's normal, you see that. But if there is a political will, we can decide them. You mentioned that we are in isolation, but if you not look just only, if you don't watch just only CNN, but if you switch on other channels, you will see international fora that we organize and how many countries come to the Russian Federation. I just mentioned just only soccer event. There is now, you see that our business community has organized a fora where we are discussing what to do with the various countries, how to develop our economic relations. Moreover, yes, United States has decided to introduce sanctions. We decided to look to the east. We decided to look at China, India, ASEAN countries. We have established good cooperation links with them. And we compensate losses that we got from the cooperation between the United States and Russian Federation, as well as between Western countries and the Russian Federation. And you can see that now, for example, another example, additionally maybe example, it's our relations with Turkey. I understand that how it is important for some politicians to see that United States is in the center of the whole planet. But we have UN Security Council, where we have 5 permanent members. And these 5 permanent members, as I mentioned, bear special responsibility for peace security. And we are responsible for the whole situation in the world. It's up to us to decide whether we respect legally binding documents that we supported. For example, JCPOA. United States was in favor of this plan. United States voted in favor of this legally binding document. And something happened, and the United States decided to withdraw from this document. Does it mean that United States now in isolation? It seems to me yes, because the rest who are members of JCPOA is considering to continue implementing this treaty. What's about CTBT? You see that there was a decision that all countries who possess nuclear capabilities have to sign and ratify this treaty. Britain, France, Russia have ratified. Why United States is reluctant to do it? Why we can't say that United States is in isolation? I would like to mention that I don't want to say that United States is in isolation. I just would like to say that United States has its own national interest, and we respect them. The same we would like from you. As to demographic problems, as you mentioned, yes, we have such problem. We are trying to solve it, and some economic programs were adopted. We need more money. We have to do a lot of course. And we are looking at your example, how you are trying to solve this issue, and we would like to use your experience in this regard. As to the first use of nuclear weapons, we have our doctrine. By the way, we have this identical doctrine that the United States has. You will use nuclear weapons when somebody attacked you by nuclear force or attack your allies. The same situation with us. So, by the way, it's a very interesting subject, and maybe it's high time for our experts to sit together to look at military or nuclear doctrine of the United States and Russian Federation and to compare and to see what kind of lack of understanding we have. And it's very important, you see that issue that you raised in the beginning of your remarks, trust. Trust is undercut. I don't want today to blame anybody. I just would like to say you that we need to do a lot to restore trust, confidence, and to return back at the table of not negotiations, but discussion. At this stage, many formats that have been existing for many, many years are closed. For example, one of our ideas is to restart consultation at the format of 2+2, 2 ministers of foreign affairs and 2 ministers of defense. Whether it is a bad idea, how could we understand each other without talking to each other? It's impossible to understand, just only to use Facebook, to use internet, to use mass media, that's all. Maybe it will be better if, for example, Princeton University will invite Russian team, Russian students, Russian young politicians, for example, to come. You will sit in one hall and you will discuss all outstanding issues. Or we will blame each other, saying that the United States is just only one country who is right on everything, and there is a Russian Federation who has to obey United States law. It's impossible for us. The situation has changed. Not just only the Russian Federation, China. Yes, I understand that you have some concerns regarding the policy of China, but it seems to me that if we're a sovereign country, I hope that you understand that we also would like to see our country great. I like slogan by Mr. Trump. I want America great. I also would like to say that I want Russian Federation great. Excellent, you said it. But why don't you give me opportunity to do it? Why don't you respect my position, my foreign policy? And moreover, I don't want to undercut your interest. I would like to improve, I would like to strengthen security, not at the expense of the United States. By the way, that's why we are offering you negotiations regarding arms reduction, regarding confidence-building measures in various spheres, And it's up to United States to decide whether you need INF treaty, whether you need a START treaty. It's a very important treaty, by the way. Yes, I'm honored that I participated in negotiations with the United States on this treaty. It was a balance of interest. It was equal footing for each problem, you see. We succeeded. We supported this document, and the United States has supported it as well. What has happened, you see that within these 7 years, just only last February, we came to the ceilings identified in this treaty. What we have now, we have a problem of verification. Whether it is good for United States to know about Russian nuclear arsenal, it seems to me it's fine. It's in the interest of you. It is in the interest of the United States to know more about nuclear arsenal. And please, give me an opportunity to know about your arsenal as well. So it's up to you to decide who we are. I tried, you see that in my remarks, to show you that we are not enemies. We would like to offer you partnership, strategic partnership, and it's up to you to decide whether you are ready to do it now, or maybe we need to wait for a while. When toxic dust disappears in Washington.
Before I hand the mic over to Anna Makanju, let me just inform the ambassador and also the audience here that on this question of fostering cooperation and understanding between our two countries, and particularly between the youth, that in February, Princeton will be hosting a group of students from your alma mater, the Moscow Institute of International Relations, for a crisis simulation here. So there are some efforts being made on the American side and the Russian side. MGMO is very enthusiastic about this as well. Now,
I will send you a few bottles of vodka for
believe me, we can make good use of that here. Now Anna Makanju will deliver her comments and questions.
Ambassador, thanks for coming here to speak with us. I agree with Michael that engaging each other is particularly critical in times of crisis. You mentioned fake news, but also the importance of talking to each other. And Russian officials often accuse the United States of whipping up anti-Russia hysteria. But it seems to me that cutting people-to-people ties and efforts to generate anti-American sentiment are also at an all-time high within Russia at the moment. One example is the closure of many of the American corners around Russia, which are small libraries that host cultural events, share American literature. And you also highlighted the US-Russia cooperation during World War II. And one of the incidents I found most depressing was an exhibition of in Russia of World War II photographs of American and Soviet soldiers fighting together that was shut down by Russian authorities. But especially this is evident on Russian television, which is still by far the most popular source of information for Russians. So every year when I go back to St. Petersburg and spend time with my grandmother, who loves watching Channel 1 and Russia 1, which are fully owned by the Russian government, and also the two most popular television stations in Russia, it's been really striking. Even growing up in the Soviet Union, I never really saw so much intense negative focus on the United States. There are, of course, pretty constant news coverage that asserts the US funds terrorism or sides with fascism around the world. I actually took a look at RT right before coming here, and one of the headlines was, quote, "Siding with fascism. Western ideologues pose greater threats to the West's security than ISIS." But even when I was in Russia this summer, I watched shows that suggested 9/11 attacks were planned and executed by US special forces, questioned whether the US faked the moon landing, which I think only 50% of Russians believe happened, and even a show about how a secret CIA program kidnaps children and turns them into zombie soldiers. So I understand that sanctions and diplomatic tensions add to the very negative view that Russians hold of the US, but I wanted to ask you if you're concerned that this content from Russian government outlets that is so strongly reinforcing anti-US sentiment will also make it more difficult to improve the relationship. And of course, I wanted to ask you about the recent events in the Kerch Strait. I know that Dmitry Peskov argues that the seizure of these ships was necessary to defend Russia's maritime borders, but there have been Russian vessels and aircraft have been accused of European airspace and exclusive maritime economic zones a number of times in recent years. And none of those incidents ended with a military response by European governments. And you also mentioned the danger of eroding international norms. So even though, of course, Russia maintains that it has the right to control the Kerch Strait, which of course most of the world does not recognize as being in Russia's control, there's the question of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which would explicitly allow Ukraine free access to its southeast coast, which I think even Russia still recognizes as belonging to Ukraine. So I would be interested in hearing how these actions would comply with the UN rules. And also, if you want to mention why Russia felt it was necessary to deploy the surface-to-air missiles to Crimea as part of this confrontation.
You see that I have been waiting such a question.
Undoubtedly.
It will be stupid and not wise from my side not to wait for such a question. I'm prepared. You see that English is not my mother tongue. That's why you see that I decided to make some remarks beforehand on this Ukrainian crisis, and I will be ready to discuss with you as well. And if you permit me, I'll take just only 3 minutes. And because on the first question that you raised, you said that it's very easy to answer because fake news are coming, it seems to me, from the perception, not perception, but assumption that there is no trust between us. There is a lack of discussions between us. Again and again, there is a lack of dialogue between the United States and the Russian Federation. You see that many times I tried to discuss with American people, with some politicians, not American people. You see that, for example, recently I visited California and Salt Lake City. You see that when I came to the same auditorium, you see that the first question was, what is going on in Washington? We don't understand them. We would like to have a good relations with the Russian Federation. We have a lot of ideas how to develop these relations. You see that it's not a fake news. It's a real message that I got from San Francisco and Salt Lake City as well. As to Ukrainian crisis on the incident in the Sea of Azov, Regarding incident in the Kerch Strait on November 25th, American mainstream, as well as you, keeps saying about the Russian aggression against Ukrainian ships. Although, what would your action be when your borders are crossed by armed men with no friendly intention? How should our sovereignty be protected from violations? I believe that our responsible services handled the state border intruders professionally. I believe that if such incident was to take place in the United States, the reaction would have been much harsher. By the way, you said that sometimes my colleagues, some politicians are asking why we are so nervous regarding the build-up of NATO capabilities along the boundary between the Russian Federation and NATO. I couldn't imagine, for example, if tomorrow there will be missiles very close to the territory of the United States, for example, deployed in Cuba. What will be the reaction of the United States armed forces? We can imagine. But at the same time, there is a lot of American military capabilities appeared now, or built up now, very close to the boundary. And if, by the way, medium-range and short-range missiles will be deployed in Europe after the decision of the United States to withdraw from INF, it will take just only 3-4 minutes to St. Petersburg, maybe 5 minutes to Moscow. What will be the reaction of the Russian armed forces? So I would like to return back now to Ukraine. To all who wish to get the bottom of the incident, I suggest starting with geography. It is self-consistent and has no political bias. Russia is the only coastal state on the Kerch Strait, the place where the said provocation took place. Russia, within its own sovereignty, as you understand, has a logical right to protect its own borders. Please note that the Ukrainian ships intruded on our borders in a place that had been part of the Russian territory before our unification with Crimea. Before, in the southern part of the Kerch Strait. Therefore, provocative intentions are obvious. With that, I must end that Ukrainian vessels have no trouble. Please. Ukrainian vessels have no trouble getting to the Sea of Azov through the Kerch Strait. Just two months ago, in September, Ukrainian warships sailed through the strait unimpeded in cooperation with our marine pilots. So there is a question. What changed on November 25th? Why did the 3 Ukrainian ships unlawfully intrude on the Russian national waters, performed aggressive maneuvers, simply asking to be intercepted? What task did they want to accomplish? By the way, 2 counterintelligence officers were on the board of these Ukrainian ships. It's clear that they are just pawns on Kiev's interpolitical chessboard. Take a look at how this incident is handled in Ukraine. People are being convinced in aggressive plans of Moscow. Now, the problem of martial law. You remember history? 2014, there was problem between the Russian Federation and Ukraine on Crimea. Martial law was not introduced. 1 year later, 2015, a problem with Donbass when civil war has started. There was no martial law at that time. What has happened now? The problem of these vessels, it's very easy to solve if our boundary special services will sit together and to discuss what kind of problems we have, what kind of technical unclear problems they face, and it's very easy to solve. But decision to introduce martial law was taken now, 4 months before presidential election. There is no success at all in economy of Ukraine. We know how Mr. Poroshenko is popular. So you see that there is, and please, you said that maybe next time if you decide to invite me once more, you said that I need a map. Don't forget that I was also a professor of political economy in the Institute of International Relations, and I prefer to use map and chalk and blackboard. You see that.
We'll have it. We'll have it.
Maybe next time. So you see that if you see in which regions martial law was introduced, you will see that there are regions where popularity of Mr. Poroshenko is 0. So population will not be permitted to vote if Mr. Poroshenko sticks to the position to organize presidential election in March. So it's our understanding that there is just only one pretext. You see that to use this provocation to call on Mr. Pompeo, as it was made by Mr. Poroshenko, to make a phone call to NATO countries to show that you see that we are in defensive position, please help us. You see that Russia is planning to invade Ukraine. Moreover, if you see some pictures, you will see children who are digging earth, trying to be ready to counterattack Russian soldiers. We are not planning to invade. Please, you see that it's just only hysteria, nothing more. Again and again, there is a problem of technical nature. It's very easy to solve. If there are some misunderstanding between our technicians, between our sailors, for example, they can sit together and they can solve. Thank you.
So I would like to, if time permitting, I would like to open it up to the audience for questions, but Ambassador, I know you generously agreed to stay here till 5:30, which we're already at that time. I don't know, would you have any extra time to field any questions from the audience?
I don't want to be polite. You see that that's why if you, please, I would like you to understand I have to leave, but you see that of course I will stay for a few minutes because I would like also to speak to you who would like to raise some questions, maybe some concerns, some remarks. You said it, please.
Okay, then if I could ask.
5 minutes, 10 minutes, if you don't mind. But I don't want you to feel offended. Yes, please, I have to leave.
So as a rule, Princeton students are always the first to ask questions. So I'd ask if anyone in the audience is a Princeton student, if they could please come to either one of the microphones here. And if you could also just introduce yourself, your name, perhaps what year you are, and your major if you have one. And if there's anyone else, if we have time for those questions, if you could identify yourselves, and especially members of the press.
Maybe you will come to Washington. Maybe you will come to my embassy. We will organize such a meeting. You said that your students, you said that I will be at home and we will spend the whole evening. And I will provide you meals. You said that it goes without saying.
Yes, please.
So my name is Brent. I'm a sophomore here, and I plan to major in the Woodrow Wilson School. You had mentioned that you want to make Russia great and improve its sovereignty. I'm curious as to what all that includes and what all the United States could do to help if we see it proper, I guess.
You see that, frankly, you see that what we want, we just want equal footing treatment. What we want, we would like not to use double standards. For me, frankly, as a person who devoted 30 years to international, to UN affairs, you see that it's very strange that sometimes for United States, one legally binding document is good and another legally binding document is bad. regardless that all two documents were signed by the United States. You see that, frankly, I don't understand why sometimes your perm rep in UN are saying that if you don't vote in favor of Russian Federation, we will punish you. You have to decide, you have to think that there is a lot of countries around the United States who would like to live it in our own style. They don't want anybody to impose culture, democracy. They have their own history, for example, Middle East. I just would like to draw your attention to what has happened in Libya, in Iraq. I am not sure that you are satisfied with this situation. And what we want, for example, from United States, what kind of steps? Just we need respect to the rest of the world. And don't consider yourself superpower, just only power that possess equal rights and equal obligations on the scene. That's all. And you see that it's up to political will. I'm sure that we can decide all outstanding issues. As to Russian Federation, we are ready to make compromises, but not at the expense of our sovereignty. I would like you to understand it.
Dobro pozdravovat. Welcome to Princeton. I'm Sakaria Shetyar. I'm a master's student at the Woodrow Wilson School here, and I think it's very interesting you've just mentioned Libya. At the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that US and Russia may have different ideologies at times, but we do not compete in security and strategic objectives. And perhaps this is true in an area like Ukraine, which certainly has more strategic importance to Russia than to the United States. But in the Middle East, I will offer you the opportunity to say a little bit more about how it could be that the United States and Russia do not have competing security objectives, particularly in Libya and particularly in the more publicly known example of Syria, where Russia has stepped in militarily.
Okay, you said that it will need a few more minutes. I'm not sure that I will be in position to answer to other questions because your question is very important. I didn't touch it during my remarks, but if you permit me, I will tell you in details. Why we are in Syria? For many years, we have two military sites there under the permission of Damascus government, Tartus and Meimim. There are two agreements ratified by the State Duma and Syrian government, even before this disaster that we see now in Syria. It's the first. The second issue I would like you to think, not to answer, but to think, what is the legal base for United States forces in Syria? Legal base, again, legal base. There is an explanation that you would like to fight against terrorism and other remarks, but what is a legal base, as well as for other so-called anti-Daesh coalition on the territory? It depends upon you, upon your decision, upon your assumption, how you treat Syria, whether Syria is an independent state or it's nothing on this soil. So the second, you see that, when we came to Syria, when we expand our presence in Syria in 2015, at that time I was Deputy Minister for Defense. I was responsible for international military cooperation. And one of my tasks was to offer the United States to cooperate together against Daesh, against terrorism. We put on the table two ideas: to sign two memorandum of understanding, or not understanding, moreover, you said that, memorandum of cooperation between the United States and Russian armed forces. One is the conflicting in air, and another one is the conflicting on the ground. I have failed to persuade my American friends to have two documents that could be a base, at least political base, for a cooperation between the United States armed forces and Russian armed forces on Syrian territory to fight terrorism. We succeeded to persuade our American friends to sign just only one memorandum on deconflicting in air. I have failed to persuade my American friends to have an agreement how to save pilots if their aircraft shot down. Till now, till 2018, I don't understand why I have failed at that time. You see, because it seems to me that it's very important to help each other, because we are trying to implement the same task to fight against terrorism. And if there is a disaster with a pilot, you see that we must help Americans to save a life of your pilot. But it seems to me that I can rely on your reciprocity, that you will help us as well to save a life of my pilot. But I received a negative answer on this issue. If you imagine a map of Syria, you will see a few parts that there is no country as it was 5 years ago. For example, there is a northeast part where Turkey is operating. There is a northeast part where Kurds and armed forces of the United States are operating. There is a central part which is under the control of government of Assad. You see that it's very interesting that we have confirmed that there is just only one base for a peaceful settlement in Syria. It's UN Security Council resolution. We are trying to speed up the process, how to do it. But we need more cooperation from the United States Armed Forces. And also we would like to know when you decide to withdraw your troops from this territory, or if you decide to stay, what will be legal base? And one more site on the territory of Syria, it's a so-called region at Tanf. Maybe you know at Tanf. There is a zone where United States have a military base, and you are operating from this base, and you cover some distance from this base as well. So as to us, we would like to be close contact with United States armed forces to deal with Syrian issue. Just only yesterday, it seems to me, yes, yesterday, we finished a meeting in Astana, so-called Astana process, where Turkey, Iran, and Russia participated. To our regret, you said that United States decided not to participate in this trilateral dialogue. And it seems to me it's a lack, again, of communication between our armed forces. The problem is for the United States, it's very simple, that your Congress has prohibited your armed forces to cooperate with the Russian Federation. And every time when I have an opportunity to meet to your military guys, I try to persuade them that if there is a cooperation between the armed forces of the United States and Russian Federation, it will be in the interest of your national interest as well as ours. I'm dreaming maybe time will come when Minister of Defense, Mr. Shoigu, will come to Washington, and you will welcome him maybe here as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if you have any more time or.
Sorry, you said that. Sorry, you said that. As I have informed you that I have to leave at 5:30. Now 15 minutes before 6. Please. Don't feel offended, you said it, but I have to leave.
Thank you very much.